March 17, 1943. Berlin. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of German military intelligence, slammed a folder down so hard that coffee splashed from his porcelain cup, staining classified documents. The report in his hands was not just disturbing, it was impossible. According to agents operating out of Mexico City and confirmed by multiple intercepted messages, the Ford Motor Company's Willow Run plant in Michigan was producing a massive B-24 Liberator bomber every hour. Not every week, not even every day, every hour. Each aircraft contained 1.5 million parts, 450,000 rivets, 30,000 separate components, and weighed 18 tons. And yet, they were rolling off an assembly line as if they were Model Ts. Canaris stared at the numbers, his hands trembling. If the report was true, Germany was facing an industrial storm unlike anything in history. His subordinate, Major Friedrich Wilhelm Heinz, had checked the intelligence 3 times. The figures didn't change. But here lay the problem. German leaders had spent years convincing themselves that America was weak. Hermann Goering had laughed at similar reports before, insisting that Americans could make refrigerators and razor blades, but not warplanes. Hitler himself dismissed American industry as corrupt, run by Jews, and incapable of efficiency. Now, Canaris faced a dilemma. If he presented this report to Hitler, he risked being ridiculed, or worse, accused of spreading enemy propaganda. But if he ignored it, he might be overlooking the single most decisive fact of the entire war. The intelligence was clear. The United States was building bombers faster than Germany could manufacture trucks. And in that moment, Canaris realized something chilling. Nazi Germany's future might not be decided on the battlefield, but in the factories of Detroit. To understand why Canaris's report was so explosive, we need to look back 2 years. In 1941, German attachés in Washington had already warned Berlin that America's aircraft production was reaching 2,000 planes per month. That number alone should have made Nazi leaders pause. But instead of alarm, Hermann Goering burst into laughter. Americans? He scoffed at a staff meeting. They can make toasters and refrigerators, maybe even good razor blades, but they cannot make warplanes. Adolf Hitler agreed. He believed democracy was inefficient, a system doomed to fail under pressure. He dismissed America as a mongrel nation, too mixed in race, too soft in spirit, too corrupt to ever fight a disciplined war. In his eyes, the American worker was lazy, spoiled, and unfit for total war. That arrogance was Germany's fatal blind spot. Nazi ideology blinded its leaders to reality. Instead of studying the facts, they filtered every piece of intelligence through racial theories and propaganda. Reports that didn't match their worldview were either ridiculed or suppressed. This was why the Abwehr, the German intelligence service, found itself trapped. Canaris and his officers collected accurate information, but each time they tried to deliver it upward, they hit a wall of disbelief. To admit that America could outproduce Germany wasn't just dangerous politically, it was unthinkable ideologically. So Goering kept laughing, Hitler kept ranting, and the Reich marched deeper into a war built on illusions, ignoring the one truth that would eventually destroy them. The United States was not only capable of war production, it was preparing to overwhelm the Axis with it. What the Nazis dismissed as propaganda in 1941 was, in fact, the future bearing down on them with mathematical certainty. If Berlin wouldn't believe its own attachés in Washington, perhaps it would believe the words of Americans themselves, spoken over drinks in Mexico City. On the night of February 3, 1943, inside the German-Mexican Commerce Association's Grand Hall, chandeliers glistened above a crowd of businessmen, diplomats, and intelligence officers hiding in plain sight. Among them was Harold Morrison, an American oil executive who had recently toured the Willow Run plant in Michigan. After several tequilas loosened his tongue, Morrison began to talk. "What I saw defies description," he told the room, unaware that Wolfgang Blau, a German agent posing as an Argentine leather merchant, was memorizing every word. Morrison leaned on the bar, his voice rising with excitement. "The factory is so big, clouds form inside it. Sometimes it actually rains indoors. The assembly line is over a mile long. They have 42,000 workers, thousands of them women, even black women, building the most complex machine ever created." He pulled a pencil from his pocket and sketched a crude outline of the B-24 bomber on a cocktail napkin. 2 bomb bays, each holding 4,000 pounds of explosives. 4 engines, each putting out 1,200 horsepower. And the way they build them— He paused, shaking his head in disbelief. "It's like rivers flowing together. Wings from one side, fuselages from another, tail sections from the third. Everything meeting perfectly on the line." Blau feigned casual interest, sipping his drink. "Surely with such complexity, production must break down often." Morrison laughed. "That's what the aircraft companies said. They mocked Ford, told him you can't build planes like cars. But Ford broke the bomber into 60,000 tiny steps. A woman who yesterday was making breakfast for her kids now installs hydraulic lines in the tail. She learns her task in days, not months, and she repeats it until she's perfect." That casual conversation, scribbled on a napkin and carried back to Berlin through secret channels, was more devastating than any battlefield defeat. For the first time, German intelligence had eyewitness testimony, straight from the mouth of an American, that the impossible was real. And yet, when the report reached Berlin, the same disbelief lingered. Surely this was exaggeration. Surely this was propaganda. But the evidence was piling up, and soon it wouldn't be just from Mexico. The reports from Mexico were disturbing enough. But within weeks, German intelligence began receiving confirmation from far more credible and far more dangerous sources. First came a Swedish engineer named Erik Lundberg. Neutral Sweden allowed its engineers to travel, and Lundberg was invited to tour the Willow Run plant in early 1943. When he returned to Stockholm, he filed a detailed report for his government. German agents quickly intercepted it. His conclusion was blunt. "The efficiency defies European understanding. The factory operates like nothing I have ever seen. The capital investment must be staggering. Hundreds of millions of dollars in tools and machines designed for single operations." Then there was Colonel José Ungría, Spain's military attaché in Washington. Spain was officially neutral but leaned toward Germany, and Ungría fed Berlin regular intelligence in exchange for shipments of precious tungsten. At a reception in Washington, Ungría cornered Charles Sorensen, Henry Ford's production chief, the man nicknamed Cast Iron Charlie. Sorensen, proud of his achievement and believing he was speaking to a friendly neutral officer, described his miracle in detail. "We build bombers the way we build cars," he said, "not by having men swarm over a single plane, but by moving the plane past workers who each repeat one task. We train 8,000 workers a week. 40% of them are women. Some of the best are teenagers, boys barely 16. Everyone contributes." Within 2 weeks, those words were on Canaris's desk in Berlin. And if that wasn't enough, confirmation arrived from an unlikely place, Japan. Commander Toshikazu Omi, a Japanese naval officer touring Detroit in March 1943, sent a coded message back to Tokyo. The Germans intercepted it, believing they'd gained a windfall. Instead, the message stunned them. This single factory produces more aircraft monthly than the entire Japanese aviation industry combined. 3 different nations, Sweden, Spain, and Japan. 3 separate channels, all saying the same thing. For men like Canaris, the math was becoming undeniable. If the numbers were even close to accurate, then Germany was already losing the war. Not because of battlefield defeats, not because of strategy, but because of factories that could outbuild an entire continent. In the end, numbers don't lie. And by the spring of 1943, the numbers coming out of America painted a picture darker than any German officer dared admit aloud. Oberstleutnant Nicholas Ritter, head of air intelligence within the Abwehr, was no fool. A former Lufthansa pilot, he had lived in New York during the 1920s. He had seen skyscrapers rise into the clouds in a matter of months, and he understood something his fellow officers did not. The United States possessed an industrial culture unlike any in Europe. After reviewing the latest reports, Mexico, Sweden, Spain, Japan, Ritter delivered his verdict to Admiral Canaris. If these numbers are correct, and I believe they are, then Germany has already lost the war. It is now only a matter of mathematics and time. The math was staggering. At peak, the Willow Run plant alone produced 650 B-24 bombers each month. Across America, total B-24 production exceeded 1,400 per month. For comparison, the entire German aircraft industry, spread across dozens of factories, was struggling to produce fewer planes in all categories combined. One bomber required 1.5 million parts, 450,000 rivets, and 30,000 components. Yet Ford broke this down into 60,000 simple operations, each repeated endlessly by trained workers. To the Germans, steeped in a tradition of craftsmanship and skilled labor, it was unthinkable. But the American system didn't rely on artistry. It relied on volume, repetition, and scale. The result was merciless efficiency. Germany might spend weeks hand-finishing an aircraft fuselage. At Willow Run, a fuselage slid into place on the assembly line like a refrigerator rolling down a conveyor belt. And here was the cruel truth. No matter how brave the Wehrmacht fought, no matter how skillful the Luftwaffe pilots were, they were up against arithmetic that could not be cheated. For every bomber Germany shot down, America could build 2 more. For every tank destroyed in Tunisia or Italy, Detroit and Pittsburgh were already working on replacements. Germany was bleeding machines it could never hope to replenish, while America was drowning the skies in steel. Ritter understood, Canaris understood, but convincing Hitler, Goering, or even the General Staff was another matter entirely. To them, numbers were just numbers. To Ritter, they were the handwriting on the wall. The war was being lost in the columns of a ledger long before it was lost on the battlefield. If Willow Run was the miracle factory, then Charles Sorensen was its architect. Sorensen wasn't a professor or an engineer in the traditional sense. He was a self-taught problem solver, the son of Danish immigrants who had worked his way up through the Ford Motor Company. Workers called him Cast Iron Charlie because of his stubborn determination. When people said something couldn't be done, Sorensen simply rolled up his sleeves and proved them wrong. In 1940, he traveled to San Diego to study how Consolidated Aircraft was building the B-24 Liberator. What he found horrified him. Planes were being assembled outdoors under the California sun, each one a little different from the last. The process took 180,000 man-hours per bomber, a pace that could never meet wartime demand. That night, in his hotel room, Sorensen grabbed a pencil and sketched a radical idea. What if bombers were built the way Ford had built Model Ts? Not in small workshops, but on a moving assembly line. Not by swarms of craftsmen working on one aircraft, but by workers lined up as the aircraft moved past them, each person repeating a single task until it was second nature. When he returned to Michigan, Sorensen pitched the plan. One enormous factory, larger than any in the world, designed to turn out one bomber every hour. People laughed. Even some at Ford thought he'd gone mad. Building cars was one thing. Bombers, with 4 engines and 1.5 million parts, were something else entirely. But Sorensen was relentless. He broke the B-24 into 60,000 separate operations. He designed sub-assembly stations so wings, fuselages, and tails could be built independently, then merged on the line like tributaries feeding into a river. He pushed for specialized tools, 1,600 of them, many designed for just a single task. Then came the workforce. America had never seen anything like it. 40% of the workers were women, Rosie the Riveters, who learned their tasks in days. African-American workers, long excluded from skilled labor, were trained to run sophisticated machinery. Teenagers just out of school managed logistics and supply lines. To Sorensen, democracy meant everyone had a role. By 1942, Willow Run was rising out of Michigan farmland, a steel city under one roof. At 3.5 million square feet, it was the largest factory in the world, and when the line finally began to move, the impossible started to happen. Sorensen had turned the dream of a bomber an hour into a living reality. And that reality was about to shake the foundations of Nazi Germany. From the outside, Willow Run looked like a city made of steel and glass. From the inside, it looked like something out of science fiction. Imagine walking into a building so vast that clouds sometimes formed under its roof, and yes, it occasionally rained indoors. A mile-long assembly line cut through the heart of the factory. Alongside it, tens of thousands of workers performed the same motion again and again, each one a cog in a machine designed to turn out bombers like clockwork. Here, the B-24 Liberator was no longer a handcrafted aircraft, it was a product of standardization. The bomber was broken into sub-assemblies, the wings built on one side of the factory, fuselages on another, tail sections on a third. Each was rolled to the line like streams converging into a river. Piece by piece, they merged into a complete machine. One worker, often a woman who had never worked in a factory before the war, might spend her entire shift riveting the same section of metal skin. Another, a young man barely out of high school, installed hydraulic lines. A machinist might drill the same bolt holes day after day. Critics mocked the idea at first. You can't build airplanes like cars, they said, but Sorensen proved otherwise. The beauty of the system was in its simplicity. No single worker needed to understand the entire aircraft. Each just had to perfect their own step. Repetition bred speed, and speed bred precision. And it worked. Ford engineers trained workers in days, not months. They built an apprentice school on site, turning out 8,000 trained laborers every week. Women proved especially skilled at the delicate, repetitive tasks. Their smaller hands made them perfect for wiring tight spaces and fitting precision parts. What emerged at the far end of the line was astonishing. A 4-engine heavy bomber rolling into daylight, its silver skin gleaming, ready for combat. Each one could carry 8,000 pounds of bombs, fly 2,000 miles, and deliver destruction deep inside enemy territory. It wasn't just an aircraft, it was a weapon of mass production, a symbol that America's strength wasn't just in soldiers or generals, but in the ability to harness the power of ordinary people, working side by side, turning raw materials into victory. For the German spies who gathered reports on Willow Run, the thought was chilling. The Americans weren't just building planes, they were building them faster than the Luftwaffe could shoot them down. By the spring of 1943, the evidence was overwhelming. Reports came from Mexico, Spain, Sweden, even intercepted Japanese cables. All told the same story. Ford's Willow Run plant was producing bombers at a pace the world had never seen. And yet, when those reports reached the top of the Nazi chain of command, they hit a brick wall. Hermann Goering, commander of the Luftwaffe, sneered when shown the numbers. "American propaganda," he said, waving the papers aside. "The Yankees want us to believe their women and their Negroes can build warplanes. Nonsense. They are weak. They are soft. They can't even discipline their own factories." Adolf Hitler was worse. To him, industrial reality mattered less than ideology. "This is Jewish trickery," he snapped, when Canaris cautiously mentioned the possibility that American factories were producing far more than German intelligence had once thought. "A mongrel nation cannot defeat the Reich. I will not hear of it again." Inside the Abwehr, the mood was grim. Officers like Nicholas Ritter and Friedrich Heinz knew the reports were credible. But to push too hard was dangerous. In Hitler's Germany, disagreeing with the Führer could cost you your career or your life. So the most accurate intelligence gathered in the war was locked away in safes, ignored by the men who needed it most. It was, in many ways, the greatest intelligence failure of the war. Not that Germany couldn't collect the truth, but that it refused to believe it. Nazi pride, racism, and fear of the Gestapo made it safer to echo Hitler's delusions than to speak the hard truth. And so the Reich marched forward, blind to the industrial avalanche gathering across the Atlantic. While Willow Run was spitting out a new bomber every hour, Germany's leaders still clung to their illusions. They were fighting not just against Allied armies, but against arithmetic itself, and they were already losing. For years, Nazi leaders had laughed at the numbers. But by mid-1943, the laughter stopped. The skies above Europe became the proof Germany could no longer ignore. In North Africa, Luftwaffe pilots began to notice something unsettling. Every time they shot down an American bomber, 2 more seemed to appear the next week. By the time the Allies invaded Italy, the scale of American air power was staggering. Squadrons of B-24 Liberators filled the Mediterranean skies, their silver wings stretching from horizon to horizon. Then came the nightmare over Germany itself. On January 27, 1943, the 8th Air Force launched its first raid against the Reich. 64 bombers attacked Wilhelmshaven. The Germans thought it was a one-time show, but soon the raids grew larger, heavier, more relentless. By October, on what became known as Black Thursday, over 200 American bombers struck Schweinfurt. 60 were lost in a single day. A shocking toll. Yet within 2 weeks, the losses were completely replaced. For the Luftwaffe, the math was unbearable. They were losing irreplaceable pilots with every mission. America, by contrast, could replace both planes and men with frightening speed. In Berlin, even the most optimistic staff officers began to realize the truth. The United States wasn't bluffing. It was producing war machines at a rate that no European nation could match. Major Johannes Steinhoff, one of Germany's most respected fighter commanders, later admitted, the American pilots were no longer amateurs, and worst of all, there were more of them every day. Every mission, every bombing raid, reinforced the reality German intelligence had tried to deliver months earlier. Willow Run wasn't a fantasy, it was a factory, and it was winning the war 1 hour at a time. By the end of 1943, the Luftwaffe was bleeding to death in the skies. What began as disbelief in Berlin had become a daily nightmare over Hamburg, Bremen, and Berlin itself. The arithmetic of American production was now written in smoke trails across the European sky. By the spring of 1944, Charles Sorensen's bold promise had come true. The Willow Run plant, once ridiculed as Will It Run by skeptics, was now running at a pace that defied belief, a completed B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes. Day and night, the mile-long assembly line never stopped. The roar of machinery, the hiss of pneumatic rivet guns, and the shuffle of thousands of workers' boots created a rhythm that was almost musical, a heartbeat of American industry. At its peak, 42,000 men and women filled the factory floor. Housewives who had never held a tool were now expert riveters. Teenagers balanced on scaffolds running wiring. African-American machinists operated precision tools once thought too delicate for unskilled labor. Each bomber rolled out gleaming, a massive machine of war built from 1.5 million individual parts. Fuselages slid into place, wings were bolted on, engines fitted, and finally, the Liberator rolled into the daylight, ready to take its first flight. Workers cheered as each one left the line, knowing it would soon thunder across the Atlantic to strike at the heart of Nazi Germany. In April 1944 alone, Willow Run produced 428 bombers, more than the entire German aviation industry managed across all aircraft types in that same period. Think about that. A single American factory built on Michigan farmland, outproduced an entire empire's worth of factories spread across occupied Europe. German intelligence officers, when confronted with these numbers, could hardly breathe. One whispered to another, "We cannot shoot them down fast enough. Even if we doubled our pilots, it would make no difference." For the Reich, it was the beginning of the end. The B-24 wasn't just a bomber. It was proof of what democracy, industry, and mass production could achieve when harnessed for total war. Every 63 minutes, America's strength grew, while Germany's shrank. And no speech from Hitler, no denial from Goering, could stop the steady march of bombers rolling off that line. In war, gathering intelligence is only half the battle. The other half is convincing leaders to believe it. And here, Nazi Germany failed completely. By 1943, the Abwehr had everything it needed. Reports from Mexico City, Spain, Sweden, and even intercepted Japanese cables all confirmed that America was producing bombers at a rate that dwarfed German industry. Colonel Ritter and Admiral Canaris knew the truth. They saw the arithmetic of defeat written in black and white. But when they carried their reports upward, they ran headlong into arrogance and ideology. Hitler didn't want facts. He wanted reassurance. He wanted to hear that the United States was weak, corrupt, and incapable of fighting a long war. Goering, desperate to protect his own prestige as head of the Luftwaffe, dismissed every warning as enemy propaganda. And within the Nazi system, to contradict the Führer's worldview was more dangerous than any Allied bomb, so the reports were locked away. Canaris himself, already distrusted by Hitler, dared not push too hard. Officers whispered the truth in private but parroted lies in public. One Abwehrman later admitted, "We stopped telling the truth because no one wanted to hear it. To be right was more dangerous than to be wrong." It was one of the greatest intelligence failures in history, not because the data wasn't collected, but because pride and fear smothered it. The Nazis had the evidence in their hands that America's factories would bury them. They simply refused to accept it. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Ford's Willow Run plant roared on, building a new bomber every 63 minutes. Each day, the gap widened. Each day, the truth became harder to ignore. But by the time Hitler and Goering finally realized the reality, it was too late. The sky above Germany was already filled with the proof of their failure, waves of liberators and flying fortresses blotting out the sun. In the end, Willow Run was more than just a factory. It was a symbol. For Nazi Germany, it was the proof they had refused to believe. What began as an unbelievable report in Berlin, laughed off as propaganda, became a daily nightmare written across the skies of Europe. For every bomber Germany destroyed, Willow Run built another. For every pilot lost, America trained 2 more. The numbers were merciless, and they told a story of inevitable defeat. For America, Willow Run was something deeper. It was democracy in motion. Housewives, farmers' daughters, immigrants, African Americans, young men just out of school, all walked into that factory and became part of the greatest industrial miracle in history. They weren't soldiers on the front line, but every rivet they set, every wire they fitted, every engine they mounted was a blow against tyranny. By April 1944, one bomber was leaving the line every 63 minutes. By war's end, Willow Run had produced nearly 9,000 liberators, each one a machine that carried the hopes of free nations and the doom of the Third Reich. German officers who survived the war admitted later that they had never understood America. They thought the United States was soft, divided, incapable of sacrifice. Instead, they discovered that when pushed, America was a giant. Its strength measured not only in steel and oil, but in the determination of ordinary citizens who believed in something larger than themselves. The lesson of Willow Run endures. Never underestimate the power of a free people united with purpose. When industry, ingenuity, and willpower come together, miracles happen. Miracles like a bomber built from 1.5 million parts rolling off the line every hour until victory itself was mass-produced. And so, in the frozen ruins of Berlin, the prophecy that Canaris once read in disbelief had come true. Germany wasn't defeated by propaganda. It wasn't even defeated by generals. It was defeated by the quiet thunder of American industry, by factories like Willow Run, where every 63 minutes, freedom took flight. And now I'd like to hear from you. What do you think? Was Willow Run the true turning point of World War II, or was it just one piece of America's unstoppable industrial machine? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every one of them. If you enjoyed this story and want more untold tales of World War II, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. That way you won't miss the next incredible chapter of history we'll uncover together, because here, every week, we bring the past back to life.